First of all, like a few disclaimers before we get into the story of why I'm embarrassed that I did a PhD. First, yeah, I get it. This is very niche. This is probably only interesting to someone who has been through a grad school program, probably only helpful to someone who maybe is considering it, particularly someone maybe considering a UK grad school program, or maybe, and I would hope that it could be at least entertaining to those who want to take stock of and make fun of my mistakes. I think that actually might be the main purpose of this video. So yeah, it's niche. Second, this is my personal experience. I am not an authority. And a third disclaimer, yes, I understand it is a privileged position to have done a PhD. And while I'm gonna say some like possibly cynical and negative stuff about the PhD process and also the outcomes of a PhD program, I know that it's still like a privilege. I know that it was still like an interesting thing to have done, and there are a lot of people in the world who maybe want to do it but are not able to do it, and I guess like on some level, yeah, I'm grateful that I have done it. Maybe, I don't know. This is a story really of assumptions and realities. It's about the realities of funding structures. It's about the realities of the outcomes of doing a PhD, particularly in terms of like what you do if you maybe are more creatively motivated but you accidentally did an academic program, like, oh dear, what happens next? And it's also about then my own personal discomfort with the fact of being seen then as someone who did a PhD and kind of having that take on primary identity status in some ways with some people, even though it's like, oh wait, that's not me. It's like the title of the Arctic Monkeys' first album, whatever people say I am, that's what I'm not. And I do happen to have the same birthday, not the same year, as frontman Alex Turner, so maybe there's something to that. The real crux of this is like every time someone mentions that I have a PhD, and it does happen sometimes, and I'm like, ugh, I cringe internally. And I'm not like being humble here, like I really do feel deep discomfort at having like done a PhD. I do think the discomfort stems from kind of an inauthenticity to the whole process, to have never really wanted to have been an academic, but kind of finding myself occupying this like very serious status in life, I guess. The fact of the matter is that I never in the slightest wanted to be an academic. Let me get into that a little bit. So like background wise, going back to the very beginning, or not the very beginning, but like far off beginning, like I was an obsessively good student in high school. That is the one thing that would maybe suggest a future tendency towards academic pursuits, but I was really just doing that because I lived in a small little town and wanted to escape it by going to a big university, and like that was it. That was why I was obsessed with grades. That was it. That was the only reason. But like I never had any desire to be a professor, a researcher, a scientist, like none whatsoever. In fact, like the jobs I wanted when I was growing up were in order: a flower shop owner, singer, actress, writer, as well as like a brief doctor phase in high school, like medical doctor, but I think that's kind of just one of those side effects of being a kid who's kind of good at math and science and having people say, hey, did you ever consider the medical track? It pays good money and you get to help people. And I'm like, well, yeah, I love status, so sure, why not? But that was really short-lived. What I'm saying though is that like I was kind of an arts kid, and I was never really like that academically motivated. Never was like, oh my god, I love research and facts and details and I like to know everything about everything. I want to know how things work. I didn't. So then, given this background and given these propensities that I have, imagine my surprise when I ended up doing a master's. But I really ended up doing a master's because I couldn't think of a single other thing to do when I was graduating from like my undergrad degree. I was like, okay, I feel lost. I guess I'll just apply to grad school because that is a delay and I get to move to London. Like, perfect. When I was doing the master's though, I really understood that I wasn't doing it for the purpose of actually doing a master's. I was more doing it for the purpose of, let's say, biding my time. And when I was doing it, I was way more interested in dating British guys than I was with actually doing the coursework. Like, genuinely, I really believed that I might fail. Really believed it. Which brings us to the point of how I ended up applying for and then actually doing a PhD program. Let me set the scene, okay? So like, I'm 23 years old. I've recently moved to the San Francisco Bay Area for one of those British guys for like no reason. It was really horrible. And I saw in my email that I'd received my master's results from the master's program that I had done in London in the previous year. And I was like immediately actually quite nervous because while I knew I hadn't been like a great master's student, I also didn't want to fail. And I really did think like, oh, I didn't try that hard. Like I might have failed. Oh no. And so like it didn't really mean a lot to me to like actually have a master's degree, but the blow to my ego would have been significant. So like I was sitting in a Starbucks in Berkeley, California, about to open my master's results. Interesting choice that I decided to do that in public. I'm not really sure why, because I feel like had it gone the way I expected it to go, there could have been tears. However, there weren't. In fact, I opened my results and it was like fine. You know, not like the best result you could have gotten, but respectable, a respectable showing. And I was like, oh my God, I think I might be brilliant. I think I might be, what, an academic? Yeah, that thought set off a lot of things. And so then I thought about my misery in California. And I thought about what potential avenues to leave California this master's result actually might have opened up. And suddenly, in my mind, this vision formed of using these master's results to apply to PhD programs and in effect, go back to England where I'd been so much happier. And also, and this is critical, bide more time before I actually had to like enter the real world of work and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. I know what I'm doing now. What I really wanted to do though, I guess, was live abroad. And sure, I knew there were other options for someone wanting to live abroad. I knew there were those teach abroad programs where you can go and teach English in another country. I was aware of those. Wasn't sure if I wanted to, had no real desire to be a teacher. Also, like, I feel like you didn't get so much autonomy over which country you end up in when you do one of those programs. You kind of go where you're needed, and I was like, I do actually want to choose my country, and I kind of want to choose England. Like, I have a complicated relationship with England now, but at the time I was like very in like the kind of British indie kind of, like, I liked that vibe. I was really into that, and so I just wanted to be there mainly for the British indie vibes. That was the reason. And then I knew also, like, you know, you could do like an au pair program in France, but I didn't really want to look after children. So like, you know, studying in the UK kind of did seem like the best way to like actually get what I wanted. And so like, I was like, yeah, I mean, it's gonna be expensive, it might be foolish, but I think it's probably gonna be worth it for, you know, the ability to live abroad. I also had no real idea what I wanted to study. So academic background wise, I had done a degree in German, not because I really wanted to do a degree in German, but I did because I happened to have enough credit hours, and indecision won the day. Ultimately, I didn't really choose a major, and the major chose me by giving me enough credit hours in German language. And then my master's was in European studies, very vague, in keeping with the vagueness of my overall goals and dreams in life, but I liked it. It was like policy and stuff, a little bit of like cultural studies, a little bit of history, a little bit of like arts and literature. Like, it was very like broad-based, and I liked that too. And like at the end of this master's degree, I'd started dabbling in some like health policy stuff, and I kind of liked it. I thought it was interesting, and also like it did satisfy this like do-gooder kind of element that I can have in myself. And I was like, oh, well, if I do like a public health program, then I'm, you know, one, getting to live in England, two, I'm doing something that other people will take seriously, and three, yeah, I seem like a good person, so like it ticks all those boxes, why not? And so like I just wrote up a proposal. I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, well, I'm gonna just like propose this, and I wrote to some academics working in the field and Some of them wrote back to me and some of them were like, interesting idea, but maybe you want to develop it a bit further. Maybe you want to look at this or this. And I refined the proposal and continued sending it out to people and had a bunch of, I think at the time it was like Skype calls with all these like academics. And then eventually I met a, pair of potential supervisors who seemed really nice and really like laid back and flexible, and they were willing to take me on as a researcher. And so I was like, yeah, I accepted. They offered me a position to do research with them and I accepted it. And like to this day, like I don't regret that decision. I really do. I think I made a good choice of supervisors, cool people, North Americans also, which may be relevant, like I think in the like kind of different attitude to academia, and also like being a North American in a British institution, I was glad to have two North American supervisors who did not maybe have the same indoctrination into like British class system and status and hierarchies. So good choice there. Good choice. This is not a story overall of my good choices, but that is one area that I did get right. So now, okay, now it's like we're on to the fun part. We're on to like the details of funding. Essentially, like when you do a PhD in the UK, I don't know if this applies to other countries, but essentially there are two options. You can either be a funded student, meaning like you effectively have like some sort of like institutional funder backing you up. Sometimes it's funded through the university, sometimes it's funded through some external source, some like research body, whatever. Or you can be self-funded, which means that you do a project and you pay for it yourself out of your own pocket via whatever means you decide. And so like the difference between funded and self-funded is obviously funded is more financially sound and like gives you a paycheck, like probably not a big paycheck, but a paycheck all the same. But what it also means is you probably have less autonomy of choice in the subject you study. You're maybe doing a piece of research for your supervisor's larger research agenda, or you're doing something that's like, with clear parameters around it. Whereas in a self-funded project, as I found, you have a lot of leeway basically to choose your topic, to decide how you want to do it. You're paying for it yourself, so you kind of call the shots. And now the thing about self-funding, first of all, is that it's kind of like seen as the lesser. It means that you're kind of not viewed as being up to the same standard as the other people in the program. And like normally this would have really bothered the elitist in me, but it kind of didn't. Like I was kind of like, okay, well at least I get to decide what I want to do, and that means everything. Maybe at the time I did feel a little bit of like discomfort about the self-funding option. I really should have felt a lot more discomfort about it because I did pay for it like mostly through student loans and also through like working a part-time job through the entirety of my full-time PhD, which was like probably not the best choice in terms of like, mental health and burnout and exhaustion, and also like quality of the ultimate product that I produced. Like how good could it have been if like I hadn't had to also spend, quite a few hours every week, well, specifically 20 hours per week, which is the maximum that I as an American could work in the UK, but to spend 20 hours per week on top of the supposed full-time PhD, how good it could have been if that extra 20 hours had gone towards like actually, I don't know, like doing my research and writing. Hey, who knows? I could be a great professor today, but I'm not. I'm not a professor at all. I don't work in academia in the slightest. That's why I'm making videos, because like I'm lost. But see, I also don't think though that I made the wrong choice in some ways in doing a PhD, because like during the actual process of studying and like researching or whatever, it kind of allowed me a lot of flexibility in life. It kind of allowed me to live on the outskirts of like our current structures of work, because I was still doing something that was socially validated, but I also had a lot of autonomy in what I did, in what questions I looked at, what I read as background, and just how my days looked. Like I had complete control when I wasn't working for my part-time job, over like how I structured my time. And it was kind of like the most freeing time I've ever had, while also like having like that backing of, oh well, I'm with this university, like they validated me as a person, so like you should believe in my validity too. It was kind of like great. Even though like, did I actually love the act of doing research? Sometimes. Like it was okay. Like it was genuinely okay. I liked doing field work. I liked, recording field observations. I liked conducting interviews. I'm not really like talking too much about what my actual research looked like here. It's more about kind of like the social structures and the PhD student's position within the social structures that I'm looking at. And like a lot of it was just like, honestly, like reading about social structures and conceptualizing how they work and how different people interact within social structures. And now I'm kind of just applying that to me, aren't I? I'm just saying, hey, like that's how I interacted within the social structure of academia and society, and it allowed me. It was really freeing. Honestly, it was really freeing. Okay, now I'm gonna say like a little bit too on the topic of like imposter syndrome, because this is another thing that comes up a lot when I'm like reading about other people's experiences of doing academic work. And I definitely did, in all the times that I've told myself, oh, I'm not a serious academic, oh, I was just doing it like for the vibes, like I was just doing it to live in the UK, like I was like, well, maybe am I just like viewing myself as an imposter and trying to like just downplay my achievements? I'm not sure. I don't really think so though, because I think to like feel like an imposter in something, you have to actually genuinely have wanted at some point to do it, and it has to kind of be part of your desired identity, where it like wasn't really. Like, so I didn't think I was like impersonating anyone. I just was kind of like doing my thing. Like I could say the right things about methodologies and stuff, and I would do things well. Like I still had like a level of pride, I guess, in the work that I put out, but like fundamentally though, like I wasn't serious about playing the game maybe of academia. I wasn't concerned about publishing in academic journals. I wasn't concerned about rising through the ranks of hierarchies. I wasn't concerned about attending conferences and presenting my research. I wasn't concerned about any of the things that I think I was supposed to be concerned about. I was perfectly happy doing my little bits of research and writing behind the scenes and working my part-time job at a charity in London and just like kind of having fun, really just floating through life. And I think maybe that's part of the point I'm trying to make, is that I was perfectly happy to float through life. And for a time, the PhD allowed me to do just that. However, like all good things, it had to come to an end. And oh, come to an end it did. It all came crashing down and burning. Now I think we're about to like reach the thesis statement of this video, which is why I'm embarrassed that I did a PhD. And that has to do with like the outcomes and prospects and view of you within society, and kind of what you're expected to do post-PhD and what you might actually want to do post-PhD. As I've said, I do have this like very infuriating creative tendency, I suppose you could call it. Let's call it a creative temperament. Let's call it a desire to kind of just, like float around and do whatever and daydream and think my little thoughts and maybe write them down. And that's what I'm happy doing in life. Whereas like once I'd finished the PhD, I felt that while it had been this incredibly freeing experience while I was doing it, while I was funding myself with student loans and part-time jobs and stuff, when I finished it, it really boxed me into this level of extreme seriousness that was completely contrasted with the freedom and flexibility that I'd had while I was a student in a PhD program. Suddenly I felt that to do justice to what I'd done and to do justice to all of the people who had participated in my research, that I had to go and look for academic jobs. I felt like I had to work in academia, work for a university, teach or produce original research, basically play the game of academia. And academia really is nothing more than a game. It's not really based on like learning and knowledge and research. It's like who can get the fanciest publication record, who can get their stuff in the best journals, who can go to the best conferences and meet the best people. And I don't know, like even like teaching and stuff like seems to really fall by the wayside, and even research seems to fall by the wayside. And is that not supposed to be the point of academic work, is like to do research to expand humanity's understanding of life? I don't know. I thought so, but I don't really think it is. But then like even outside of like the academic world, when I decided, okay, I'm not gonna do anything academic, I think I'm gonna go into the nonprofit world, I still think that I found myself just like held to this level of seriousness, kind of bland boringness, kind of like getting pigeonholed into this idea that, oh, I'm just a serious scientist researcher. I'm not. I'm like not, can you tell? Like, and maybe in a different world there could have been a place for me in academia if maybe the real world of academia and research actually aligned with what I found my experience of a self-funded PhD to be. Maybe then it would have been different. Maybe that is sort of like the ideal of what we should all go for in society. This life where people have flexibility in their time, they have flexibility in the subjects that they choose to think about and investigate and spend time with. And I know it looks like I failed miserably in the PhD venture, but sometimes I do wonder if maybe I did crack some sort of code, if maybe I figured out the ideal of how I want to live my life. And now, rather than lamenting the fact that I've done all this work and now I don't want to touch the field it's prepared me for with a 10-foot pole, maybe now I can look at it and say, well, actually though, I do know what type of life I want to have. I want a life of, I guess, intellectual curiosity. I want a life of freedom. I want a life where I set the parameters for how I spend my time and what I spend my time doing, and I don't just fit into the boxes of the academic world and spend my time basically trying to climb the hierarchies of academia. Maybe I did crack the code, and maybe that code is to have fun doing what you're doing and to do it with freedom. And maybe there's a world someday in the future where that will come to pass. And I can only hope that it will be, and I can only hope that maybe learning these big time analytical skills I gained through my PhD, that I can one day be a part of making that world more of a reality. But we'll see.